All right. And as I kind of mentioned earlier, there's 3 different viewing options at the top right. For this, it's probably best to put it into an active speaker view versus the grid view. I know everyone is kind of reminiscent of the Brady Bunch, and when these meetings with the grid, it feels kind of like that. But for this, it'd be best to put it in the active view. And then I'm actually going to hand it over to a tech support person to help host. If we need to mute you to just help avoid some of the background noise, we may do that. We're not trying to hush you, but you should have the ability to unmute yourself. So before you begin speaking, you may just want to kind of check and make sure that you're not muted. I don't hear a lot of echo, so we may not have to do that, but just in case. Let's see, where is
your objective view?
You want us to use the chat or Q&A section at all?
They're there if anyone wants to, but we're trying to focus mostly on the kind of spoken engagement. So I'll just kind of go ahead and get started. Appreciate y'all being our guinea pigs, I guess, because this is our first session. So we may adapt as needed kind of going forward, but hopefully everything works pretty smoothly here. This is the first part of a 2-part kind of virtual charrette, if you will. Today, we're really focused on, translating the objective and policies into what it looks like on the ground. We can discuss anything that you want to, but if you really want to get into like wordsmithing different policies and stuff, that's probably best suited for part 2, which actually just went live a day early. So if you go back to the same website where you signed up for this, you can now access that. But if you want to get into some policy stuff, we can kind of talk about it. But eventually, all of the policies will translate to something tangible. And so that's kind of what we're looking at today. We have different staff, someone from each of the divisions in the planning department, as well as a representative from growth management is here to help answer questions you may have. But really, this meeting is about hearing from you all. So you can kind of steer the direction you want to go with the meeting. And at this point, I'm actually going to hand it over to Devin and Floyd to facilitate the conversation. But I'm going to be here to help answer questions and all. So Devin, it's in your court.
Okay. So good morning, everyone. Hope everyone's doing great. Give us a couple seconds. Can we go ahead and get the map pinned up to the main screen? Everybody just kind of nod it if you see the map right now as your main screen. Okay, awesome. All right. So everyone should be pretty familiar with Welaunee as you're all on here. I think what we want to do is we just really want to kind of open it up, and we got going to be using the map, working on the map. As you guys talk about things, you can draw on that map. So if there's anything you guys can think of or want to talk about, just anyone to kind of take it off and talk about things with Welaunee, and we'll start looking at the map and what we can put on there, and then talk through different ideas or anything you bring up. And if that's kind of a difficult way to do it, we could also start with kind of the map that's there in general and talk about where this map came from, if that helps anyone. Would you guys like to do it that way?
Yeah, I'd like to know how you, tell us the sources for this so we can also possibly find more data to put on this and make it a more detailed map.
Awesome. Okay, Pam, that sounds like a great way to start. So you want to jump in a little bit and talk about this map and where it came from and kind of, how it all came about?
Sure, yeah. Basically, the property owner came to us, and this is the sort of thing we do all the time. When someone has a piece of property and they're curious about, anything and everything about their property, they come in, and this is like just our typical site assistance that we do for everyone. And so they said, we, kind of want to look at the property, kind of make some long-term planning. Kind of like, what is the possibilities in the kind of future or stuff like that, recognize the fact that, they may not live forever. And so we said, okay, sure, let's take a look at it. So basically what we did is we sat down and we outlined the boundary, which is this black, outline that's dashed around here. and said, well, the first thing we need to do is identify all the environmentally sensitive areas, like your floodplain, your wetlands, any other really sensitive environmental areas. And that's kind of the greenish, bluish that's around the map. And so we hatched all that off and said, okay, well, that's off the table for like any, like, significant impact development, anything like that. And so let's just, take that off the table up front. So we did that. And the other thing we did said, we had the Greenways Master Plan. So we had basically this Miccosukee Greenway right here. For those of you that may not feel it continues on off the map. And so in the Greenways Master Plan, had a linear greenway that basically goes around the perimeter of the parcel like this. And so we basically hatched that out, said, okay, that's off. And then there's some stars on the map that talk about future roadway connections that go into the property. And those are not anything that we came up with recently. These were pre-negotiated, when the owner, donated the land to what's now the Miccosukee Greenway. And way back in the day, and I think many of us weren't around at the time, but there was agreements in place when the family donated the land for the Miccosukee Greenway, which is here, and it actually is on this side of the page too. It's actually got a boundary that goes like this on this side here.
Floyd, can you slide your map over a little bit?
Okay, yeah, sure thing.
Come up.
Yeah, and so this is the Miccosukee Greenway on the east side of the road, and so you cross right here. And you're on this side of the road. This is where you cross back. For those of you that use the Greenway, and so when they donated all this land, they negotiated, connection points, knowing the fact that it is a canopy road. Let's try to limit impacts to the trees on canopy road. And so these were located, back in the day, and most of these line up with an existing driveway. Whether it's a driveway they use for their own property or whatever. So these were connection points that are already determined. So we said, all right, let's put those on the map. So we did that. And,
Can I ask a question about that? Go
ahead.
The most southern one is Thornton, right? That connects across to Thornton. What about these next two? What are they connected to? One of them must be.
This one?
Yeah, what's that one connected to? What's on the other side?
That's their driveway that they use.
Yeah,
now.
no, but what would it connect? Is it going through from Miccosukee Road? Their driveway there isn't anything on the other side, right? Is there development?
No, it's just an entry point into this parcel.
Okay, and what about
it doesn't do anything to the other side of the road. This is the Greenway on the other side, so there's no roadway connection on this side.
Well, there must be something that connects it to Miles Johnson. Where's the Miles Johnson connection?
I think that may be down here. That's down here.
Oh no, that's not Thornton. Thornton is on the other side.
Yeah, Thornton's way down here.
Yeah.
This is Miles Johnson here. Thornton's down here.
Okay, so then the next two don't connect. No, they don't connect to anything across. They would just be connections to Miccosukee. Nothing heading on further into the heel.
Correct. It would go this way.
Yep. Okay.
Because you got the Greenway here, and we're not going to put a road through the Greenway right here.
Well, you're doing it through Thornton, through Miles Johnson, though, right?
Yeah, because that's an existing intersection.
Right.
And so that was kind of one of the agreements. It's kind of like Thornton's down here, and that lines up with
it's on the I-10, right? Okay, I forgot. Okay, thanks. Sorry, I just.
That's a great question. And then kind of, if what you see, kind of the yellow, the brown shade, is basically we said, okay, that's what we consider like upland area, area that's maybe pasture, planted pine, things like that are less environmentally sensitive. And so if anything were ever to be done on this parcel or sold off or anything like that, these are the areas that it would essentially be limited to. And then that's basically the extent of it. And then we said, okay, well, take into account future roadway project and stuff, how could you potentially do circulation through here? And I think this is one that was kind of, that's like the roadway we just talked about. This is, I think it was in the news recently, and Blueprint's working on. This is not in any way the final alignment. This is just basically showing a dash that, hey, there's a point here, potentially a future point here, and it's somewhere in between, roughly here, just because we don't want to show it going through the floodplain and stuff like that. There's a Shamrock connection here, which, to be determined as well. And then it makes sense to maybe have some connection over here and say, okay, this might how you do a connection over here. But these are no way in any alignment that are predetermined or anything like that. Just basically said, if you're going to do a road anywhere on this parcel, somewhere in this general vicinity versus like going through like a floodplain or something like that. And that's basically the extent of it at this point. It's just a very loose conceptual plan.
Well, Floyd, would you say that the idea behind just what was laid out there was just to show circulation with limited impacts to any environmental features?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay.
Well, let me ask a question about environmental features, because all you have on here is wetlands. The uplands have substantial environmental features, and they're all listed as fully developable. Surely you guys have information about some of these upland conditions, about other things that are in there. I mean, I know that. Mhm.
I was gonna say that you're correct. That's right. And let's say we'll just take this parcel here for example. Let's say this parcel here was sold off, and say someone wanted to develop it. Then that would go through the that's the detail that you would get into as far as the permitting process. Like if you had this parcel of land, you couldn't develop 100% of that yellow area. You'd have to go through just exactly what you just talked about, Pam. You have to say, okay, you go out there, do your environmental assessment, your EIA, your impact analysis, natural features inventory, and identify all those features out there. And so you may get out here, let's say there's a bunch of endangered species, or it's full of gopher tortoise habitat or something like that. Then that would start to shrink down what you could potentially do in that area. That would be that next level of detail if someone were to move forward.
I strongly suggest that you don't wait for the next level. Populations of animals do not pay attention to PUD boundaries. Just like stormwater doesn't pay attention to PUD boundaries, it flows downhill. I think at this stage it'd be important to pick out, I mean, we're at the high level, quote, NFI. We don't need to go into all the details, but I think as you've nicely delineated the basic conservation and preservation features of wetlands and floodplains, although I know that some of those can be used for stormwater and other things to some extent, I think it would be important to add, you've got 3 colors for development. I think there ought to be a minimum, just for balance, of 3 colors of potential environmental impacted areas. So I mean, we got lots of information that we can look at from not only your GIS information, but also just from photographs that we can have a good suspicion about what type of habitats might be there. So I think it's important. And by the way, I mean, I know working with enough developers, you guys know it much more intimately than I do, but I know from negotiating with them is they often get to this point where they say, just tell me what you want me to do. Don't keep giving me these possibilities. Just tell me what you want me to do. And so I think, particularly at the outset, if they already know something about where there's potential environmental impacts that they're going to have to think about, that helps them greatly, not only in making decisions about whether or not to buy it. I think it might also, unfortunately, create them to carve out weird-shaped PUDs, but I think right now at this level, we need to know a lot more about some of these other natural features that are going to need to be protected. And you can't protect animal populations by individual PUDs. They will die by 1,000 cuts. I've seen that numbers many times, because if the whole population isn't included in the PUD, then okay, I can move 10% of it here, and then the next time we move another 10%, and by the time we're done, there's no population left. So I would strongly say at this point, there needs to be additional information about the uplands and the types of habitats and environmental protections that may need to occur there. At the high level, don't wait for the PUDs. This is what master planning should contain, in my opinion.
Artie, we have that taken down as
I'll go ahead and add that I actually had some pretty good conversations with the Florida Fish and Wildlife Conservation Commission yesterday, kind of talking about this, and so they're actually going to be providing us some data, so that'll be helpful.
Excellent. I was going to say they should be a good source, but I bet you we don't have to do any ground truthing here. We can do all this, from databases and maps and things like that. Okay, great. Thank you very much.
Of course.
Thanks, Dan. That was awesome information.
And one thing I'll just add, and Pam, I'm not in any way disagreeing with you. I agree with you make very valid points, and I agree with you completely. One thing that I will throw out there is at this point in time, there's no development proposal or anything like that. This is just simply someone, hey, I have a parcel of land. They looked at the comp plan issue, and there's no development proposal, that anybody submitted or come in with. Yeah.
No, this is master planning. At the master plan level, there needs to be, that has been our concern about this. It's not that a master plan's a bad idea. This master plan, in our opinion at the moment, is much too vague, and almost any PUD could be approved and found consistent with it. And there's, the process of PUD approval and development agreement approval is a very different process than drawing up a master plan. So I think it behooves us this time to provide as much information as possible in the master plan. That doesn't mean we limit the sorts of development types, but that we know what's there as we create the master plan and try to create some of this connectivity. And I mean, I'm going to have some suggestions about land use that really change these colors of land uses too, but I wouldn't know how to do that per se if I didn't have some idea about some of the other potentially natural features that we need to pay attention to. So more colors on the map is better. I mean, look at the heel and toe descriptions. There's lots of colors on those maps that were already in the master plans. But
sure. And John, I'll mean to put you on the spot, John, but I think this would be fair to say that this is part of our typical process as we work through the growth management process. Would you say that's a fair statement?
Yeah, it is. I would agree with that.
Yes, let's think about adding more detail in there. See if we run into anything that's going to be a real problem. I mean, this is one of the issues with the way that we always do things around here. We always protect the wetlands and floodplains to some extent. And then the uplands is where we build. Well, the uplands has lots of, particularly out in this neck of the woods. I mean, this is really open land. There's lots of bear, there's lots of gopher tortoise, there's lots of animals, but there's also, that means that there's habitat that needs to be protected and potentially would also inform where good recreational facilities would be, the passive recreational facilities, because people like being able to interact with interesting habitats, right? That's why the Greenway is so popular. So that's my 2 cents on that.
Does anyone else have any other comments on environmental features or habitats that are on the panel right now? Anyone want to add to that conversation?
This is Robin Colson, and I don't have any additional comments. I really appreciate so much Pam's sharing and questions. My only question is, and I apologize if I'm asking a question. I had to take a phone call. My mother's 91 and being released from rehab today, so I'm trying to work that out. But how would we make, I agree that at the very high master planning level, we need to have some of these questions answered and the environmentally sensitive areas identified. What does it take to make that happen? Is that just an internal decision in the department, or is that something that has to be prompted by the commission, or how do we make those kinds of things happen?
Hey, Artie, on this question, would that be a question for you from the comp plan stage? I know this would be during comp plan rather than moving forward with the PUD.
Yeah, from this standpoint, and I don't know if you were on the phone or if you were kind of listening a moment ago. I mentioned to Pam and everyone else on that I had some conversations with the Florida Fish and Wildlife Conservation Commission yesterday. And they're supposed to send me some information. They actually have pretty good data.
Okay, good. I did hear that. Thank you. So that is where it will start. Okay, good.
Yeah, and so they'll send me some information, and they may actually even have, we submitted the comments to the state for review. That may actually even be something they include in their comments. And so through this process, hearing what y'all are saying and through kind of addressing the comments from the state, kind of those are 2 avenues to address that. So yeah, it doesn't have to necessarily go to the commission to have us address that. It'll be in what we take back to the commission.
Okay, great. Thank you.
A revised draft. Yeah, you're welcome.
Great, thank you.
Anybody else want to have anything, comment, want to make any type of suggestions on the habitat side or environmental side? And if you are muted, you have to unmute before you speak.
I want to bring this up a little later, but I think I need to eventually understand how much of the floodplain, I presume, not the wetlands, but maybe the wetlands, can be impacted by stormwater management. But let's not do that right now, because I think that might, well, the stormwater management is also, to me, an earth-wide issue. I'm not talking about where each little pond goes, but I think this is an opportunity to do regional stormwater management so that developers are much more plug and play, that when they come in to do something, they can share regional facilities. I know that takes some, that's probably development agreement sort of level of work, but again, on this map, that topography will help you identify if there are closed basins. I mean, I don't know if there are. I will confess that I've wandered around their property more than is probably legally allowed. And I've tasted, I know I spent one afternoon helping someone catch some horses that, you know, dropped them, threw them off and ran into the property. So I spent a lot of time up in the northeast corner.
Sure.
I think
Yeah,
that the LiDAR stuff might help us get to that direction, not just that these things are here, but just as preliminary information to know where closed basins are and to get the people who do stormwater starting to think about where there might be able to offer but
I think that's a great comment, Pam. This is Floyd here. I think that's a great comment. And we have to short answer is yes, we started looking at that when we first went to this exercise, and we had the LiDAR topo.
okay.
And you know, as far as to do stormwater inside the floodplain out here would be very, very difficult and cost prohibitive to really do because of the, you know, the soils that are out here. You got a lot more clay out in the soils out here. And even if you're like in one of the sandy areas, it's still really hard to do the stormwater in a flood zone. This is 100-year flood, by the way, just it's an outer boundary. And because you got to do the compensated volume and all that type of stuff. And then when you add soil into the mix, it really just, it takes up so much effort, I mean, an area. But, you know, areas, but yes, regional stormwater facility, that's a great comment. I agree completely. Because you can design them to be, you know, nice and natural looking and almost be like natural amenities that you can replant and they kind of revegetate over time to kind of blend in. And it'd be areas kind of like maybe in here, yeah, this is a low area here, like this is another low area here.
See, right there are features that I think ought to be on this map. And I think that ought to be part of the master plan thinking. It doesn't say that you have to do this. This is the direction of trying to get, you know, future development to consider these areas and to use them. And I also, I mean, I don't know if this is what the city does. I know the county stormwater stuff because I've been so intimately involved with getting it created at some levels. But I think there might be a way, well, you tell me how you guys do the treatment. Because obviously there's flooding mitigation, which often is the last pond on the topographic ladder. But the treatment, I mean, especially in this area with the clays, the treatments can be in layers. So there can be an initial treatment relatively close to the development. And you don't want, you know, you want to try to avoid taking too much of the upland developable area for this, right? I mean, there's this constant playoff between having to do the stormwater treatment nearby, but then you're using up a lot of developable land. And if you can do the stormwater treatment regionally, then you can potentially use less total land. But you can also tier it so that there's treatment near development that is like the first half inch or whatever. And then there's other treatment layers down below so that by the time it hits the very flood mitigation at the very bottom, because water will run off faster during flooding, that is a final treatment pond. I mean, I know that's too detailed for the master plan, but for being able to put a soils map on top of this, now I know it's going to look complicated and the commissioners are all going to go, ah, but we can create layers. I mean, you guys know how to work in layers and we can teach them how to think in layers. But there can be a layer that's the environmental, sort of the high level NFI stuff. There can be a layer that's the soils and LiDAR that helps you identify already at this point potential regional facilities. I mean, I think regional facilities will be a very popular idea from people doing PUDs. Plus, it treats water better if we do it that way. So I would suggest that that be other layers that are on this thing and then get incorporated in some fashion in the text of the master plan, which, you know, we'll deal with later.
Great comment, Pam. And if you'll notice too, just so you guys kind of see on the map, Floyd's taking notes on the map of these different things as well.
Excellent.
That way we have it on the maps. So not only do we have someone doing note taking, but we also have maps with notes on it. Mike, did you have a question? I saw you kind of pop up on there. You just muted yourself, Mike.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yes, sir.
Okay, good. Yeah, well, a couple things. I would be, I think what Pam's saying makes a lot of sense. And what kind of just got my radar up a little bit was, you know, if my son lived in a house down in Orlando in a big subdivision that was built. The backyard was so, because it was built on swampland, basically, you know, in a floodplain. and the backyard was so spongy that they couldn't even let their dogs out without the dogs getting totally muddy and stuff. And I think you got to be aware of that. I mean, Florida's been pretty bad about building in places where they really shouldn't be put in a lot. They can build it up and make a house there and stuff, but I guarantee you the yards are going to be a problem for people. And the other thing I would also encourage us to look at, that it seems to have one of the biggest complaints that I have, and that a lot of people in Tallahassee have had, and I've been doing a lot of research, interviewing people that were on the Citizens Committee for the canopy and that development, who were on the original citizens group with that. They came up with a lot of great things, but all that stuff was ditched once the thing was built, and it was clear cut. So I would really like us to have in this master plan for this property, for the trees and the neighborhoods to be a part of the plan. If you go to Lafayette Oaks, I've got a friend that lives over in that neighborhood. The oak trees are still there. The ancient oaks, the really, you know, the signature pieces of what makes Tallahassee and Leon County, and Tallahassee for a lot of us. That's what differentiates it. So I think the uprooting of this, the clear cutting of this cannot be a part of any of the plans that we go further with for any of this development, even the heel and the toe. But with this property, why you open this up to building if we're going to just make it into something that it's not, if that makes sense. I think that's something that will resonate with a lot of people in Tallahassee, and that's what a lot of the uproar is about, that you're hearing from people, is based on the fact that they love Tallahassee for what it is. So let's don't try to make something that'll work that is not really reflective of what this environment is.
Yeah, I would add to that. I mean, I think he's right. When we talk about, we try this because, you know, you're talking to keep it rural folks, right? So we focus on what it likes to, that interface between rural and urban. But when you talk about what is the characteristics of Tallahassee, what is those, it's the trees and the topography. The way we differ from the rest of Florida is we have hills. And I don't know how many times, I mean, there's a couple of developments going on right now in town. There's one on the corner of Miccosukee and Capitol Circle, which is on a hill. And there's just a huge, you know, a huge retaining wall so they could flatten the top of it. They did the same thing on Miccosukee and Blairstone, right? Where they're putting the Florida Cancer Specialist, which happens to be my doctor, so I like that. But again, it's a huge retaining wall because they flatten the top of the hill. And I know that there's supposed to be rules in both the city and the county about preserving trees and topography, but it doesn't work. We see abundant evidence that that language doesn't work. And I know that there's going to be arguments this is too detailed, but if it isn't in the master plan, that building to the topography and respecting the urban forest, which might come out of part of this additional high-level NFI stuff where we can identify some of these upland forest types. It doesn't identify individual big trees. That's going to happen during the PUD process. But I think we can't simply say that this master plan should follow existing rules. Existing rules don't work. We have ample evidence of that. And, you know, master plans, we can take an area of town and we can make it different than every place else. That was sort of the intention of the Bradfordville sector plan. It wasn't supposed to be just the same thing that it was everywhere else built in Bradfordville. Now, we won and lost certain parts of that, but I think this is the opportunity here to recognize that saving the canopy, saving that sense of trees, and saving the topography doesn't work by just saying in the master plan that that whoever develops here will follow existing rules. So I agree wholeheartedly with Mike that the master plan needs to be much more explicit about what it means to retain that vernacular of Tallahassee. And I would say the third vernacular of Tallahassee is diversity of neighborhoods, which we will get into when we talk to the land use here. That's the human development space, that the diversity of neighborhoods is also what makes us interesting. But our trees and our topography are the definition of not being Miami or not being Orlando. And
if I may jump in here just a minute, one of the things that we have been constantly reassured about is that this is the opportunity to get it right. One of the reasons to do this all at once is, you know, it's going to be this sort of example of how well we can do a big piece of property like this. It's such a great opportunity for Tallahassee. Well, let's take advantage of that opportunity and turn this into the community, the development that's been promised, which is that it's integrated, that it's consistent with environmental regulations, that it's, chunky PUDs without some previous commitment to continuity for things like wetlands, like greenways, and I know that it's in there, but I think we need to make it abundantly clear that we expect this development to meet a standard because it's so special, because it's an opportunity to take this huge piece of the community and get it right.
Have any comments on that they want to share?
We said everything we want to say. Keep writing it on that.
Charles, we haven't heard from you on anything. Is there anything you want to share, Charles? But you just muted yourself.
I'm unmuting myself. I'm actually in a listen mode today.
Okay.
And a lot of the folks on this call, I don't know what your specific role is, but I will tell you that I am a resident in the neighborhood of Buckhead, which is the parcel in the southwest corner of the map there that is being circled. And so as a resident in that neighborhood since 1997, I have an interest, particularly in how the development of this parcel is going to impact. I'm on the north side. I live on North Hannon Hill Drive, right in front of those wetlands that are depicted. So speaking for myself, I'm comforted to know that there isn't going to be, it doesn't appear that there'll be anything developed in my backyard, but the neighborhood itself is concerned about what's going to happen on the more on the east side than the north side of our neighborhood. So I'm more in a listen mode this morning, and so far I'm comforted by the comments that have been made as far as what we've heard so far. So you won't hear much from me. I'm in a receive mode today as opposed to the transmit mode.
Okay, if there's anything that comes up and you want to jump in, just feel free to chime in.
I won't hesitate, but more than likely, this is the last of you'll hear from me.
Thanks, Charles.
And hey, and Charles, this is Floyd here. I just for a sense of scale, if you can see this corner here.
Floyd, you're going to need to slide your map to the right.
Okay, can y'all see it now?
Keep coming a little bit more.
Right.
There you go, right there.
Okay, basically right here, this is the boundary of Buckhead. And then this is really the edge of the 100-year flood right here, which would be, kind of the limits. This distance here is about 500 feet, maybe 600 feet.
Thank you.
When you get over here, that's more like 1,500 feet, which is about a quarter mile. So just to give you a sense of scale, if you will, so it's not like 20 feet, 50 feet. This is about 500 feet. Over here, that's part of that linear greenway. So that would be, something like kind of having the Miccosukee Greenway kind of run along this perimeter here. So there would be a pretty decent buffer there as well. So I figured I'd point that out just so you had at least some inclination of a, distance there.
Well, I appreciate you sharing that. And I've been, as I think Artie knows, we've had a considerable dialogue from our homeowners association and the committee that I happen to be a volunteer on. So we've had, I think to date, very cooperative, positive engagement with you all. So I think the biggest concern for us is the eastern side and what may be adjacent to us, and then ultimately, and I know it's way down the road and maybe too far down in the dirt today, but the ultimate interchange and all the things that might potentially come with an interchange and where that's going to be and all the potential I don't want to use adverse. I'll just say impacts on those folks whose residences are more eastern than I would be affected way up on the northern side of our neighborhood. But and we're very grateful for the opportunity to have engaged in dialogue with the folks at the city, the blueprint people, the planning people, and I think it's been to date. We're very pleased that we've had an opportunity to participate in the previous discussions as well as listening today.
To Charles's point, how about if you guys put a scale on this map? This map really could use a couple scales.
Good idea.
You know, I don't know, something, a small scale and a large scale, the mile scale, the quarter-mile scale, the 100-foot scale. Put a couple scales on this map.
You got that, Floyd?
Yep.
All right.
Because I've been curious about, for instance, what percentage of the acreage of this 4,800 acres is represented by that, the floodplains and environmentally sensitive areas? Can't tell.
Floyd, do you have any of that information?
Can you say that one more time? I got a little static for a minute.
She was looking at the percentages of what, like outside of floodplain, what percentage of land is left over for development?
We do have those numbers. I apologize, I don't have them on me right now, but we do have the acreages and stuff. And
It's table 13.2.5.
Artie, is that inside?
That's
Do you have that in your presentation?
Yeah, we actually have that in the draft plan. I know that the kind of the wetlands and other open space make up somewhere between 1,430 and 1,915 acres. We can put a scale on the map, kind of jumping back to that, but know that the map isn't drawn to scale per se. So if someone were to look at the scale and say, oh, well, these two roads are this specific distance apart from each other, you know, it's conceptual. It's not going to be, you know, an exact, you know, distance from one road entrance to the other, or, you know, kind of things like that. So, you know, I don't want anyone to expect it to be like to the foot accuracy.
But you need to put a key on that, Artie, to that effect, is that we need scale because it is, I mean, the boundaries are scaled, some aspects of the scale and some things are not. So you can probably say what's scaled and what's not, that the road widths aren't scaled, right? That's not
right.
Scaled. So I would do that, because I've spent a lot of time messing with this thing and finding out that, you know, certain parts of it are exactly 1 mile wide, so that I can then use that as I move around the map to measure things. So it would be nice to have that. Just tell people honestly what's not scaled. The road widths aren't scaled.
Yeah, Artie, I think what I hear Pam say that might make it easy is if we just actually put the scale of the boundary of the site, the acreage of the entire site, and then that kind of explain a bubble diagram that these are potential areas that would have it, but they're not to scale, but it would be somewhere within this area. But that way, the hard lines.
But also put a real scale in there. You know, 1/4 of an inch equals.
Yeah, we can do that.
Yeah.
Can you see this, Pam?
Slide it down, Floyd, or slide it up, Floyd. Sorry.
Can y'all see this?
Yeah. Something like that.
Okay. This is 5,000 feet. Okay.
Yeah.
This map here, as I already said, it's approximate, but it's pretty close to 1 inch equals 1,000 feet, like as it sits on my desk right here. And so, you know, from here to here, between my two fingers, it's about 5,000 feet, plus or minus, you know, maybe 100 feet.
Well, just stick a scale on it and make it clear what's not to scale, the width of the roads, for instance. But I think that your floodplains and so forth, if you've identified them probably with LiDAR, they're to scale as best as you can tell at that level. Yeah. But that's just to Charles's point. I mean, to be able to look at that corner and to have some sense of approximately how much that is. That's an important thing when people come to look at this. So, okay.
Awesome. Robert, did you have anything you wanted to add? We haven't heard from you yet either. Just want to make sure if you have anything that you have a chance to speak up as well.
Sure. Good morning. This is Robert Volpe. I'm here representing the landowner. I'm here to listen and to understand what comments are going to be considered and made, and I appreciate the staff's job in putting these sessions together. I think it's helpful to look at a map and to hear those comments and also to see them on the map at the same time. I don't necessarily have anything to add as far as comments to this point. I think the plan that has been put together by staff is one that we are in favor of and agreeable to. And I think that these comments so far will be helpful. So thank you, Devin.
Thanks, Robert. All right, anything else you guys want to jump into on this? Floyd, can we bring the map back down and kind of center it back up so that everyone can see it again? I know Pam mentioned earlier that she had some questions about land use. Did she want to talk about land use? You want to kind of jump into that part of it, Pam?
Are you guys ready? I mean,
Yeah,
okay. So
bring it on.
but if you ask me, the spigot opens. So it's like I'm trying to be good here.
No, we're here to help, and we're here to get your input. So
I think having everybody on the call, it's good to go ahead and get it, like, kind of hear this with everybody, so we can get people to listen. And we have Robert on here right now, so I think that's good too. So.
Okay. Yes. Excellent. Okay. So this big general comment. We have these land uses, and we have this phasing. And I recognize that the phasing is to some extent for the convenience of the landowners, because the landowners are not the developers. They are the owners of the land. They're going to sell parts of it for development. And you know why that's happening. They want to be able to live comfortably where they are. I mean, that's what I would do if I owned such a big company. So I get the phasing for that sense. What I don't really understand is why there's this big differentiation of density. Now, this is going to sound weird because I'm part of Keep It Rural. And I think our big argument about not moving the urban services boundary was to a large extent issues about overall how much development would end up being focused in the Northeast versus the rest of the county when there's only 56,000 people to accommodate. I don't know if people realize, but the next 25 years of 56,000 people is much less than the past 25 years. Our population is increasing, but that rate of increase is declining. We are decelerating. There's much less pressure for land use than there used to be in terms of numbers of people. But there's also no rules that say when you add 5 people, you have to add 5 acres. I mean, we can pack people in any way we want. So that had a lot more to do with our original argument about the moving of the USA boundary, but also to create a clear distinction between urban and suburban and rural. And to me, that distinction is not that you smear people out on the land at less density until you end up with 1 acre lots up by the rural area. That's suburban sprawl. The real point is when you're taking green space and you're going to build green space written in a large sense, undeveloped land, open space, and you're going to build something and you're putting the urban services area and you're going to put millions of dollars worth of urban services in, whoever pays for that, then it's urban. It should be urban. And this distinction between, I know this plan has morphed from 4 units per acre in the light tan and 1 unit per acre in the orange to, what are we at now, 10 and 6? And I think these numbers are sort of made up. I don't know that we know exactly why they should be what they are. And I'm really asking you guys to consider that I don't even know why there should be this huge distinction between these 2 different colors of orange and tan. I do think that there ought to be some serious protection up in the northeast corner from the rural areas. And I think Buckhead, to Charles's point, needs to have some serious protection too for compatibility. I know technically residential is compatible with residential, but I can appreciate they're very close. They're going to be very close to this huge commercial interchange. So I would recommend substantially increasing the buffering around Buckhead, not just confined to the skinny little Greenways plan that's coming out of the blueprint. But I think there ought to be some serious consideration as why is the west side more dense than the east side? And why isn't there one of these little purple mixed use areas? I can't remember which level of development this is. Artie, what is that? Is that a neighborhood? Is that a town? What is that? You have.
So the like the dark
neighborhood centers. Yeah. Which
yeah,
is
there's employment centers, neighborhood centers, town centers, and the activity center. Right around the interchange would be the activity center, and then kind of the other ones would either be employment centers, town centers, or neighborhood centers.
So they're not differentiated yet at this point.
Right, not at this point.
Okay. Well, for instance, I mean, I don't know if I hadn't thought about that, but for instance, the intersection over on the west side, there you guys had sort of drawn in, you know, the approximate road shapes. Why isn't east side? I'm backwards. East side. This intersection that doesn't have any purple around it. It should have purple around it. Why isn't that a town center or a neighborhood center? I'm not sure that I really understand why there's a big differentiation in density, other than perhaps up in the Northeast, and we would have recommendations for the Northeast to be a really different configuration than lots of residential. I mean, what's the thinking of that? If the USA boundary is gone, it's gone. Why is all this sort of treated, except for the environmental features, and that we're lacking? We're sort of lacking to know how much of the uplands is really ought to have some protection, or at least parkland, you know, a useful amenity.
Well, can you speak to that a little bit about how, when you were laying this out, what was your differentiation between the land uses? Was that based on any type of zoning, or were you looking at trying to keep things closer to more urbanized areas, and then, like Pam kind of said, moving out?
You talking to me, Devin?
Yes.
Yeah, it's basically at the time over here, you know, there's discussion about keeping it strictly residential over in this area, and this would start to transition into larger lots where, you know, this is more urban, and as you move this area, it started to move into larger lots. Something, you know, kind of this area is kind of envisioned, maybe it could potentially be something like the Centerville Conservation Community or something like that, and these areas here where you kind of cluster the density on the, you know, acre lots, but then you have a lot of additional conservation set aside, you know, kind of to address, you know, the comments you made earlier about some of the, you know, identify the environmental features. I was kind of thinking, like, for maybe this area, as you transition to more rural, this would be more urban, and then, you know, with this, you know, potential road alignment coming in, wherever it ends up coming in, and, you know, if it does or does not happen, this would be a kind of a primary north-south connector. And these little areas here were kind of envisioned, like, you know, the roundabout in Killearn where you got the Ace Hardware, there's a gas station, and then there's like, you know, you got the little church and Maple Street Biscuit and stuff. These commercial areas would be about that size. Envision, like, okay, maybe you have a little hardware store, potentially a gas station, maybe a couple of neighborhood restaurants and a pub, and that's really about it. And, you know, same thing here, just because, you know, they were kind of, you know, with this road, if it, you know, ends up going here, this would be a major kind of, you know, connector where people driving to work. And that's the idea, you know, behind these little centers here. And of course, this, you know, being larger because of the potential interchange. And so that was the thinking of why those are over there. And then this was all just strictly transition to like quieter, less dense residential.
Well, that's the problem. This transition is urban sprawl. 1 acre lots is urban sprawl, and it doesn't even need sewer. I mean, you know, this is the sort of thing, and I know this is sometimes difficult for my Keep It Rural colleagues to hear me say these things, but this is really, I have learned from planning that you either have suburban or dense suburban planning. I mean, this would be, you know, really dense suburbia, or rural. You don't do this in between stuff, because that's what really costs huge amounts of public monies to maintain. All the services, all the community services that people use when they're much more spread out is much more expensive to maintain. Now, you know, we'll have some recommendations about how to make a differentiation between the suburban and rural, but I don't think large lots, that's just 1990s thinking. It's just not the way to develop a 21st century community. It really ought to be a great diversity of housing types. This is also part of my opinion. I don't think there should be anything that should be restricted to single family detached. We know that creates really rather expensive enclaves, that if you always allow multiple types of housing everywhere, you know, not highly segregated, then you really can get a lot of different price points, and you can allow a lot of different types of socioeconomic class of people to live here. You can allow the teachers and the firemen to actually live where their schools and the firehouses would be. And so it's very unclear to me whether or not it makes sense to have 2,800 acres at much lower density than the 1,900 acres. I get the difference between the main thoroughfares. Welaunee Boulevard, though, we're told it's a 2-lane highway. It's not a 4-lane highway. These other ones are going to be 2-lane highways too, and if we ask in the master plan that they be built as complete streets, they should look a lot like Welaunee Boulevard. Maybe not with the same right away. I don't know how you guys are going to do that. But they should look a lot alike. And there ought to be the capacity of people who live in a residential area to not have to also drive distances. I mean, you know, it's that 880 idea that my 8-year-old and my 80-year-old don't have to get in the car and the 40-year-old mother doesn't have to drive them around. And I don't see why that shouldn't be true everywhere in this. I don't think there should be this distinction. And that's the land use part. Artie and I have talked, I mean, I've learned this from Artie. I really have, in terms of understanding the role of getting, I guess it's called inclusionary housing, and getting the median family to be able to live here.
Sure.
Yeah, because otherwise we already have, which is.
Hey, Pam, can I ask you a question for clarification, just to make sure I'm writing the info down right? So basically, what you just said is like, no to like, 1 acre lots. You want to do smaller, more dense lots and kind of concentrate the density. That's the first part. Is that correct?
Yes, and to your point about conservation subdivisions, conservation subdivisions allow you. There's no reason to have there's no reason to have a minimum lot size. There's just no reason.
And we don't.
Right.
It just I just threw that out there because Centerville Conservation, they happen to have mostly 1 acre lots, so that was just a point of reference.
Right.
But that's not what we've decided here or anything like that. That's all still to be determined. But yeah, you can have something here, and hell, they could all be. Excuse my language, sorry. But they could all be here. You could have 30-foot by 100-foot lots, like shotgun houses, and have everything clustered in a small area. With the balance being just like natural open space. You could do
it
that.
allows the same number of houses, and yet now you can protect upland habitat.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that's
basically a cluster development.
Right. Yes, that's what cluster development really allows you to do. And,
okay, so we could focus on cluster development. Okay.
Yes, I mean, and we also really we'll talk about. I mean, we've asked Artie if we can have a meeting on green space, a more elaborate discussion about green state and planning. But we would really like to see up in that northeast corner some serious park protection, because that's the corner that begins to move into what is really rural land. But yeah, I mean, you can maintain density. It's not density. Numbers of dwelling units. And you can configure them across the landscape in lots of different ways, so you can maintain, again, that look and feel of vernacular of Tallahassee, which is not just trees on an urban road. It's this combination of green space, being very close to green space. I mean, we are one of the few communities in the country, I did this work a while ago, in which the difference between being in total urban areas and being where the bears and the bobcat are is about 12 miles as the crow flies. And that's an unusual thing of having a fairly decent sized city surrounded by really quite rural lands. And you can maintain that sense as well as actually protect habitat. I mean, I don't think they have pileated woodpeckers, but I know for a heck they have lots and lots of good birds in there. And you can't protect that sort of thing in a suburban backyard. But
I think Laura was trying to jump in with a comment as well. Laura, did you have something on that?
Yeah, just one of the things we are concerned about, and I think Pam's getting to it, is, and I'm not sure I have the right words, that mixed use and inclusionary housing eliminates, one of the things we're concerned about is these roads filling up with people who are driving from the south and the southwest to work in the northeast, while all the people in the northeast drive into town to work. So right now what we have is this exchange of traffic, which is the people who can't afford to live in the northeast but work there. They do the yard work, whatever else it is, they work in the little stores, whatever, are driving north, while all the people who live in the north work in town, and they're all driving into town. And if we're going to do this right, having these little clusters where people can shop and walk and do a lot of what they do in this part of town and not add to this incredible traffic congestion we get when we have nothing but big lots with houses on them and no place to do the things that people need to do when they're not at home. Does that make sense?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Parks, lot is a big
stores, and some of the housing being affordable for the people who will actually be doing the labor in this part of the community.
Well, one thing I want
a commercial center. A small.
One thing to note right now is we are at 11:35, and I know we didn't start till about 11:45. Is anyone opposed to going to 11:45 so we get a full hour of conversation?
That's fine.
It's good.
All right, Mike, I think you had something you wanted to talk about.
Yeah, well, to piggyback what Laura was talking about, not in the inner part of the equation, but the outer. I'm still curious about these roads, Artie, that you were talking about earlier, Devin, that they're, I guess, dirt roads. Is that what's determining why we're putting them there? Because I've talked to several people that were on the original planning committee, 20 years ago or 25 years ago on the citizens committee. And what they were saying was there was going to be feeder roads from to Miccosukee that would hook up with Dipsy Mayo, Thornton, and Miles Johnson and Edenfield. And these seem to be, I can't really tell exactly where they are, what's on the other side, how far they are from places, because I'm not sure we want to have 3 roads coming into Miccosukee that aren't hooking. The philosophy then was, or the idea was, to have direct access to 90 through these roads hooking up, so you're not feeding traffic going up and down Miccosukee Road. I don't know. Could you clarify that?
Yeah, do you want me to take that, Devin?
Yeah, Floyd, if you can go ahead and just give them some explanation on that.
Yeah, this is Miles Johnson right here. Can you see this okay?
I can see the pin.
Slide it up a little bit, Floyd.
Yeah, that's Miles Johnson.
Yeah, that's the only one I see a road.
Yeah. Edenfield, Thornton, all the others, Dipsy Mayo, are all south of I-10. And so they're completely off of this map. This one right here is the existing driveway they currently use. So they would just basically, that would just be like it wouldn't be an intersection. It'd basically just be an access point into this parcel. Same thing here, just another access point here, just so we have enough. And the thing is like these are spread out. This one's like, more than half a mile apart. And this one here, this is like a mile apart. So they're not right next to each other. And so you're talking like a 5-minute drive between, like probably 2-minute drive between these if you're doing 30 miles an hour. And then these are half a mile apart. So there is some distance between these. And you wouldn't see this one from this one, as you go up and down Miccosukee. To kind of address your location here in the property, where we showed them cutting through the flood zone and floodplain, we went on the aerials and lined them up with existing dirt roads that are on the property. And so, so basically it's not like mowing a new path through the trees and whatnot. Just, basically say, okay, there's an existing roadway network with dirt roads. And so let's just, it makes sense to go ahead and locate those and kind of use those as a starting point.
Okay.
So where is Crump on this map?
Yeah.
It's up here at the top. This is the north end of Miccosukee trailhead. This is that trailhead way up here.
Okay. Well, I would suggest maybe eliminating this one right here. I mean, I don't see building a road just because it's convenient. It's already got a dirt road. That's going to be feeding. If this is only a half a mile apart, these 2 right here, the one leading to Miles Johnson and the one in between, the middle road, it just seems like you're going to have a lot of traffic feeding in once this thing's really developed onto a canopy road. When you got at one point, I can see Miles Johnson being a connection, and then that's not far from Crump up there. But there's going to be people that are going to choose they're going to choose to go that way rather than to go to Welaunee Boulevard, I would assume.
And that's something we can certainly look into, but I'll throw a couple of food for thought out there.
Okay.
The first one, these connections are, like I said, they were kind of pre-negotiated when the family donated land for the Miccosukee Greenway back in the day. And so that's why they're kind of showing these are just kind of pre-negotiated locations from that. The second thing is if you eliminate one of these connections, so that you're going to have more focused traffic circulation coming out of the other 2. And as a result of that, I'm not a traffic engineer, but you may end up with more impact at Canopy Road because now you have to probably start putting in more turn lanes, acceleration, decel lanes, and all that. So if you're concentrated at 2 focus points here, you may have to end up getting into a situation where you're having to do some widening on Miccosukee to accommodate all the additional turn lanes that would be required to meet the traffic requirements. And you know, rather than keep them to like a smaller secondary, you know, type intersection.
Right. Yeah, well, we don't want to widen Miccosukee. Another thing.
I don't think anybody does. It's a beautiful road. I ride the Greenway a lot on my bike, and
you can't do that.
Yeah. But
That's the thing that we show when we're showing how beautiful this area is. You know, it's even on the Leon County website. You know,
yes.
Another thing that I'd like you to clarify is you keep talking about how they donated this land for the Greenway. They got $4 million for that 20 years ago from the state, and that's another question I have. When you talk about the Greenway going all around this subdivision, which I totally applaud. Are they going to donate the rest of that land, or is that going to have to be paid before? And who's going to pay for that?
Artie, do you have any insight into that? Because I think that's part of the agreement. You know, that, you know, as far as like, you know, this development agreement, I would think that would be a donation, but I don't know. I actually don't know.
Artie, can you speak to that?
Yeah, and I'd actually have to go back and look at the development agreement policies. I know that certain things are being donated kind of straight up. Some things are being set aside, so it could count towards their, like if they do traffic calculations and it says that they will have to make a certain amount of improvements or pay a certain amount in towards improvements. Some of those land donations or dedications could be counted towards that. There's multiple tiers, and I can't remember exactly which is which, so I'd have to go back and look. But yeah, some of it's straight up donated. Some of it is being reserved, and it'll count towards what they have to pay. And it's, I don't know that there's anything that we actually have to straight up buy, but I'd have to look at the specific agreements.
Robert, do you have any information on
I
that?
can address that. Yes, to address the specific question about the Welaunee Greenway, which is the green dotted line on the map.
Right.
That will, at the time that the city will blueprint move forward with that project, that has been negotiated at a purchase price. And I know there was a preliminary negotiation for that, but that will be purchased by Blueprint, and that's part of the Blueprint project that was determined and approved, along with the north-south connector, the Northeast Gateway, which the land for the Northeast Gateway and for the intersection interchange for the I-10 interchange are being donated, well, designated, withheld, and then donated. It's kind of a multi-step process, but they are identified as the corridors to be reserved and not put into a development, or not prohibited from being used for that corridor. And then at the time that Blueprint then moves forward with that land acquisition, it is donated at that point.
Do you know what the price?
That answers the question.
What's for the Blueprint linear park all the way around it is?
I do not know that, no.
Just curious.
All right. We're getting up. We got about 2 minutes until 11:45, and I want to be respectful of everybody's time. And I know we got to get ready for another one of these that's coming up soon. If there's other questions or policy related items that you guys have, I know Artie's got a version 2 of this that he just, I think, went live. Is that correct, Artie, today?
That's correct.
Please go on the website and check that out. I think that'll be very helpful, and we can receive feedback through that. There's a survey attached to that as well. Artie, correct me if I misstated anything there.
No, you got it. And then I'd also say that people are definitely free, and most people have already taken advantage of it. Always have the ability to contact me directly with specific questions or different ideas.
And we really appreciate everybody coming on and giving your feedback. I think this is going to be really helpful as we move forward, and we'll be gathering feedback from each of these presentations, and then we'll have those, and Artie will have notes on each of those as we move through. And if you know anyone else that would like to jump on one of these, just have them sign up for one, because I think it is very helpful. The more people we hear from, the better that we'll be able to give feedback to the commission.
Great.
Yeah, I think all y'all had a lot of great comments today, so we really appreciate it.
Absolutely.
We'll be back.
I know you will, Pam.
Hello, Artie.
Rick, did you have something you wanted to say before we jump on?
I just wanted to thank everybody for participating at this, and I'm planning to be at most of the live conferences just to check in and listen to what the feedback is. So I really appreciate Artie and Devin and Floyd, everyone from the team taking the time to do this. Not just this, but also all the other conferences. Appreciate it. And thanks, Pam and Laura and Mike and everybody else for joining.
Okay, guys, thank you very much for doing this. This worked pretty well. Hi, Rick.
Awesome. Thank you all.
Great day.
Okay. How do I sign off?
They're going to have.
Leave event. Fine.
Don't have the room.